Hi, I'm Lois from the monthly meeting of Friends of Philadelphia, here to introduce our speaker for the evening, Greg Barnes. He is a member of Central Philadelphia Monthly Meeting. He was an Arch Street guide in the early part of this century and published a history of Arch Street entitled Philadelphia's Arch Street Meeting House, a Biography. His most recent book is Quaker Service, a report from Philadelphia with texts from 35 friends about their ministries. He also writes fiction. He has a collection of short stories entitled The Beauty Queen of Bonche and other stories of West Africa. And he's written a novel, Jane Among Friends. Greg?
All right, thanks, Lois. Hello, friends. So how did a Central Philadelphia member get so interested in the Arch Street Meeting House? Well, first, back in the 20th century, and I think all of you can remember that, I regularly went to annual sessions, and they were always held at Arch Street. And like many people, I also have a fascination with old buildings. And I expect a number of you who are Arch Street are in part attracted by the fact of that wonderful building surrounding you and its history. So the rest of my connection is really serendipity. I retired in 2001 and decided I would take on a guide role, as you heard, as part of my volunteering. Just that time, I also got together with a new CPMM member. Her name is Yoko. She is here with me. She didn't know much about Arch Street, and believe it or not, I took her there on our first date. And it sort of stuck. So the serendipity then continues because Yoko taught at Haverford College. When I moved in with her after our marriage, I was only a block away from the college library and that wonderful archive of Orthodox Quakerism. So since my real vocation is writing, it's sort of all connected. Here I am being a guide here. I've got this archive next door. I like to write. Why not write the story of Arch Street Meeting House? So I feel sort of blessed in the way this all came together. And in fact, the whole history of Philadelphia Quakerism is basically associated with Arch Street. It was the first burial ground, Quaker burial ground in the city. It was a place where Lucretia Mott and Sarah Grimke worshiped together. I found an instance of that. And of course, it's the home of the granddaddy of all Quaker splits. We've had plenty, but we had the biggest and the best right here at Arch Street. So I think most of you have seen my book at the entrance to the building, but this is, it is now 10 years old, and it contains most of what I know and what I'm going to talk to you about. The research got me into a lot of interesting history of worthy Quakers and also some people who were not, like Betsy Ross and Dolly Madison and the Frenchman Talleyrand. We can talk about them if there's time. It was all fun for me. So that's enough about me. Let's get at those secrets I promised. And if they're not secrets to you, they're probably at least things you've forgotten. I'm going to talk about Pennsylvania Quakerism briefly, generally, before circling down to our neighborhood and then the building and grounds. I say our neighborhood because I live in Old City, not too far from Arch Street. I'll take a moment to tell you about a mystery I actually did solve during my research. It's a secret that from you that you may not even want to know about, but I want to tell you. I'll take questions. Lois says she can't see everybody. I can, and Yoko will look on. So if you want to wave your hand or just unmute yourself and ask the question, I think that's fine. We're a small group. About this region, it's not a secret to most of you, but a reminder that Philadelphia was not a repeat of the Plymouth situation where the Puritans arrived, with only Indians as neighbors. Penn arrived to an area already colonized by the Swedes and the Dutch, and there were already lots of Quakers in the area, especially in New Jersey. There's even a story, I can't remember if I put it in the book, that en route up the river, Penn stopped at Upland, which was then the name of Chester, to visit a Quaker he knew. Now let me tell you about Quaker things you may or may not know about our Arch Street neighborhood. Old City and its environs 300 years ago was a Quaker ghetto. There were several meeting houses with upwards of 600 members, all in this small Old City area plus Society Hill. The first meeting house was called the Bank Meeting. There's a Bank Street here between 2nd and 3rd Streets, but the first meeting house was named for being on the river bank. As you probably know, if you know your Philadelphia past, the river then came right up to where I-95 is today. And so it's called Front Street for a reason. Another meeting house was established by Penn where City Hall is today, but it was poorly attended. The reason being, it was woody, I mean, it was a forest there, and people were a bit scared of going down there. Then in 1695, the Great Meeting House was built at 2nd and Market, which was then called High Street. Soon enough, another was built about 3 blocks away. Those of you who know Old City well have probably seen a new historical marker for our member Anthony Benezet, who lived on Chestnut, the 300 block of Chestnut, between 3rd and 4th, of course, and across the street from Carpenter's Hall. And beside that Carpenter's Hall, I don't know if you've been there, there's the footprint of what was called the Chestnut Street meeting. I think it's probably too small if it was a meeting of the usual size, running up in the hundreds of members. Then soon enough, there was another meeting house called the Pine Street Meeting, whose location was between Front and 2nd on Pine. Then later you had these neighboring district meeting houses, a northern, a southern, and a western district. The northern district was, I believe, on Keys Alley. I went up to try to find it once. Of course, there's no sign, but it's somewhere underneath the ramp to the Ben Franklin Bridge. And then the southern district was built on what was called Orange Street. And now not just the meeting house has disappeared, although I have a picture of it on a postcard, and maybe you can see this here. This was the Orange Street, also called Southern District Meeting. And not only has the meeting house disappeared, but the street itself is gone. It's underneath maybe Hopkinson House, if you know where that is. Finally, there was a Western District, and it was behind what we know, we Philadelphians know as the PSFS building, which is now, what, a Lowe's Hotel, I guess. There was also a Green Street meeting. Well, there is today too. But the one today is, of course, this was the precursor, the one I'm talking about. The one today is way out in Northwest Philly. And this one was somewhere about 5th and Race. I found Green Street just curious once I walked up there. But again, there's no sign of the old meeting house. In any case, excuse me a second. There were lots of Quakers around here. The population kept growing. So we come now to the daddy of all meeting houses, Arch Street Meeting House, which is also a yearly meeting house for the first time. It was called, as you know, probably know, Mulberry Street Meeting House then. And you spotted a mulberry market down the way. And that's because the street wasn't originally called Mulberry Street. Penn, as you may know, wanted to name all the streets after trees, with, I guess, the exception of High Street. High Street is always in England the main drag of a town. In case you didn't know, Ray Street was then called Sassafras Street. All right, well, why did they build this big meeting house really 2 blocks from the old Greater Meeting House? Well, the Greater Meeting House was on High Street, which became Market Street because of an outdoor market that turned out to be too noisy, you know, animal slaughtering and vendors shouting their wares and so on. And not only that, but the women who were there complained that it wasn't big enough. That's very hard for us to imagine today. So they needed a bigger meeting house. And then they needed one big enough, or spacious enough, I should say, with divided sides for the annual sessions, because men and women met separately. Well, the Arch Street site was not a new Quaker property. As I've said, it was the first Quaker burial ground, at least in the city. And Penn actually was supposedly there once for the burial of the wife of one of his lieutenants. Now, there were some problems with the burial ground, which you know about maybe, but I'll tell you anyway. The first, if you read the sign out that Sean or somebody has mounted outside, was about the gravestones that were put up, which sounds fairly typical, except that Quakers didn't do that, or at least they didn't want to do that. They were too ornamental, and the meeting decided to take them down, and that's why there were no gravestones there. The second thing was that there were cattle grazing on the burial ground. If you've seen the mock-up of the drinker's house in the East Room, there's a cow outside being milked. So local people at that time had cows, and they might graze there in the burial ground. And there was one other problem. You know, the University of Pennsylvania started across the street at a hotel whose name keeps changing. I can't remember what it is now. But schoolboys, they were, of course, young kids then, primary and secondary students, tended to jump over the walls, which were then 4 feet high, and romp through the burial ground. So there were problems with the burial ground, but the big one was it kept filling up. There were so many Quakers, but then when the yellow fever epidemic came, as you know, the burial grounds all through the city, including Christ churches, had to be opened up, and bodies were delivered. Well, this is maybe apocryphal, but it was said by Jamaicans and other people from the Caribbean, and sometimes it's thrown over the walls, Quakers and non-Quakers. And so indeed, the burial ground was filling up at the end of the 18th century when there were a number of yellow fever epidemics. So that brings us to the story of the walls, and they were raised from I think 4 feet to 10 feet, and it was all planned. They talked about the schoolboys, and that was the problem, but I think it was more a problem of, you know, bodies could be thrown over, and it could be non-Quakers and so on. Believe it or not, I was almost amused when I read the records. The archives, they talk about the burial ground is filling up. We've got to do something. And they kept trying to find another burial ground. I'll tell you just quickly one story. They found one in I think, Society Hill, which had sort of a high water table. And somebody can tell me if I got the right term or not. And they tried to bury somebody there, and the body floated. I mean, it's stories like that. So they had a lot of trouble finding a new burial ground. So who was buried there? I will tell you my secret, one you don't know, you didn't care to know it, but here's a name I knew back well before I came to Philadelphia, Charles Brockton Brown. Has anybody heard of him? Well, he's a literary pioneer. Believe it or not, he is the first American novelist. And I was a graduate student in literature at the University of Wisconsin, and I heard his name. He wrote a number of sort of Gothic romances, that is to say, sort of spooky stories about, crazy people and haunted houses and so on. I guess the most famous is called Wieland. I tried to read it recently and I didn't get through it. But there are 2 or 3 of us in the whole world who think we don't know where that guy is buried. Well, how do you find out when you've got this burial ground with no stones? And besides that, he had been in big trouble. He was a member of the Northern District, the one I mentioned, up here near the Ben Franklin Bridge. And the meeting there had labored with him. They're a little vague on the details. And you know what that means, though, when you labor with somebody? That person is not behaving too well. The thing is, I am inferring this, but I think it's pretty accurate. Quakers were not supposed to even read novels, let alone write them, So I think that's why he got in trouble. So in other words, he was getting in trouble with the Northern District. So he asked for a transfer to the Southern District, the one that's totally disappeared down here. But then he got into even bigger trouble because he married the daughter of a Presbyterian minister. That was really the daughter of a hireling minister, and you all know that term as they use it back then. So I tried to figure out, well, could he be buried in the Arch Street after all? So I knew that he had a friend named Thomas Cope, a weighty friend who was a diarist. So I went through Thomas Cope's diary, and sure enough, I discovered an entry on February 24th, 1810, that Brown had expressed one of these deathbed penances. And so, probably with Cope's intercession, he is buried somewhere at Arch Street. So I could report that to the literary world if they're interested, but who knows where. And that brings up another case, which I'll get to. Who else is buried there? Owen Biddle, of course, the designer of the meeting house. His father, also Owen Biddle, who was a pal of Franklin and a very interesting guy, a scientist. And I was going to add a little something. I'm sorry I forgot to do it. But so I'll go on. And Samuel Biddle, a name probably some of you don't know. I think he was clerk of the yearly meeting for 6 years. That sounds impossible, but certainly he was clerk during the split. And so he was a sort of controversial guy. And various members of the Evans family. And then the other wonderful story is, and you may know this, Samuel Nicholas is the founder of the Marine Corps. Wow, that's quite a Quaker story. Why in the world would the founder of the Marine Corps be buried here? Well, he too apparently repented enough to actually attend meetings and I guess maintain membership long enough to be buried in the burial ground. Of course, we don't know where. Now, I was present as a guide when the Marines would come out wanting to honor him on his birthday. And I understand that for a time they wanted to bring their guns in and fire off a salute. And Quakers managed to block that. His random in the burial ground. Samuel Nicholas's grave. And the grave site is probably still unknown. Who's not buried there? Well, Lucretia Mott. One of the good stories in my book is about the great women of the 19th century, including Lucretia, who went with the Hicksites. So, of course, she couldn't be buried there. She's buried at Fairhill. And Sarah Grimke, who was a very strong member, with her sister Angelina, is not buried there. She was read out of meeting for political activism. I don't think they worded it that way. But she and her sister, were at that time very famous, her sister being much younger. The two of them were more or less harassed in meeting. There was a story of Jonathan Evans interrupting Sarah Grimke in the middle of giving ministry and asking her to stop and sit down, pretty much so. And so that's something Quakers didn't do then. We don't do it now. So anyway, she and Angelina eventually removed. They followed. They had this political visibility, and I think they had independent wealth, and they simply removed themselves to New Jersey, where they lived out their days. And I think that they left Quakerism, but I'm not a well scholar, so I don't know. So there again, there are constant references at this point. As I say, Dr. Shaw was walking out of the buried in 1810. The meeting ground, the burial ground was full. There was no room for anybody. But just to finish it all, they finally were able to close it, and they built or organized a new burial ground at 17th and Cherry. Think about that address. You all know what's standing there now with a friend's name on it. Friend Select, right? So at some point they got these, it was 1868 actually, we got the Friend Southwestern Burial Ground, and they moved all those bodies from 17th and Cherry so that school could be built. So back to Arch Street, a couple of things that happened that you know about, I'm sure. One was the tunnel. I don't suppose it's a surprise, you know, there's a tunnel running from the building at the corner of 3rd and Arch, which I'll talk about again, to the meeting house, because that was also a PYN building, and they had a newfangled furnace in it, whereas Arch Street didn't have, and I'm not sure Tom Muckenberg and others will know, it may have had open fires to heat it, their fireplaces, so it was unsatisfactory. So they ran the tunnel underneath the burial ground to pipe heat in from the Arch Street Center on 3rd and Arch. And so that meant a lot of other bodies being moved. This is the 20th century, and they were moved, of course, to the Southwest burial ground. One last bit of stuff about that burial ground in the tunnel. That's famous sled or sledge, I'm not sure what you call it, sitting in the East Room, excuse me, which had transported body over the snow to the burial ground back in the 19th century. That was stored in the tunnel. They found it there at some point and brought it up. So let me get to the building. Now, strange it seemed to build a building on a full burial ground, but the summit, which is it's not really a summit, but there's sort of a high point, you know, had been kept clear. There was a schoolhouse there, and so when they decided to build, that was the place they took down the schoolhouse, but they didn't dig a basement. And you'll understand why there was no basement in the early Arch Street meeting house. And they built there not just because, well, they needed a yearly meeting house, but because this was still a central Quaker area, a center of the Quaker area. So that Biddle designed the meeting house with the less exception of that middle room, now known as the monthly meeting room, which a guy named Unkefer built about 50 years ago. And before the West Wing was built, he was buried there. Everything else, the East Room and the reception room and the front hallway, as far as I know, were all built during Bill's lifetime and were part of his design, certainly. Now, the process was sort of slow. Began in the late 1790s. The work started in late 1803. Biddle, I should say, might be called the first American architect. That term apparently wasn't used back then. Biddle himself was called a carpenter or a builder, but he was, as we would say, an architect, and he built a bridge over the Schuylkill, I think at Market Street. So the East Wing was completed in 1804. Now you may know there's a large space above it. And why would that be? Well, it was for the school. So they'd taken down a school, and they still needed a school for all these Quaker kids. So he built a space up, left a space for it. But as a matter of fact, if you go up there, you'll find it's not finished. I think Tom took me up there. And so apparently it was never used as a school. It was a site also of another technical experiment, which was a shaft to draw out hot air in the summer. I'm not qualified to explain that. Tom, if you want to butt in and tell people what that's about, do so. I think it did work to a degree. And when the West Room was finished in 1813, there was another innovation, which was the sounding board. Biddle didn't know about that. It was a recent discovery by a Quaker engineer named James Parker that curved surfaces projected sound better than flat walls. And it did work. So that's how it got a duplicate was installed in the East Room. Another fact about the West Room, of course, is it's bigger than the East Room. And the simple reason is that there are always more women in religious services than there are men. So let me give you a few of the highlights of the Arch Street Meeting House history. And don't stop if you heard this, because it's what I have to tell you. The big event, of course, in the 19th century was the big split among Quakers called the Hicksite separation. It happened in the East Room. While the women were talking and being reasonable in the West Room, the men were behaving very badly. And it was a period of Quakers really behaving badly, broken windows and things like that. Now, some of the reasons were kind of petty, but let me tell you one serious one of my interpretation. The former working class Quakers, the people who wanted the gravestones taken down in the 17th century, had become middle class. Samuel Bettle, the Evans family, and so on. And they were under a lot of pressure from the Christians, that is to say the churches, to adopt a creed. And the people like Evans and Bettle were sort of willing, the virgin birth, the ascension to heaven, and all those things that Christians testify to and that we tend to resist. So that's my interpretation, is that the Orthodox were willing to take on sort of a creed and to accept those things. And the Hicksites, who tended to be rural folks and still steeped in the old ways of Quakerism, were opposed. He was monthly meeting clerk for 60 years. I should check that, but that's a pretty long time. And Jonathan Evans was a famous, I think he was in the Revolutionary War and performed heroically, but he was a very devoted and autocratic type of Quaker. So there was resentment, particularly I think at Green Street meeting up the way, of the people at Arch Street running things. Now in the 20th century, there are probably very few secrets that you don't know. Term limits were imposed on clerks, of course. One of the most exciting, I'm ahead of myself. Oh, I wanted to talk about the Arch Street Center at 3rd and Arch. That was a Quaker hostelry. Now I have to tell you a bit about Biddle's big mistake in building the building. He forgot about horse sheds. This is a Philadelphia Yearly Meeting building. So all the rural friends were coming in and they needed a place to park. And Biddle and his team were all city guys, and they walked or took some other conveyance to meeting. They didn't think about horse sheds for the rural folk. So that was one mistake. The rural folk also needed homestays. Another fun part of my book was to sort of talk about the situation of a family in town hosting a family from the country. Anyway, Biddle didn't make many other mistakes. So I was going to talk about the Arch Street Center. Well, it was a PYM hostelry. So at the early meeting time, it hosted all these folks that came in from the country who needed a place to stay. And there was a restaurant there. And of course, on the first floor, as some of you remember, there were other Quaker operations. I think Friend's Journal was there for a time, or The Friend, which was the Orthodox publication back then, and others. Now, the best part of the history is, of course, about reunification. It was pretty clear as the 20th century moved on that the differences between the Orthodox and the Old Hicksites were not really all that significant. And so small groups would actually begin meeting together. You know, there were separate historical societies, for example. They started meeting together. There were youth groups, and I think they were particularly interested in meeting together. And Hicksite boys and Orthodox girls and vice versa got together to the consternation of the elders, but there was no way of preventing those sorts of get-togethers. And so it became pretty clear that reunification was needed. Eventually the elders began talking together. And in 1955, in the East Room, Hicksites and Orthodox came back together again. Let me pause and say I can take questions. I'll read you something about one of my feminists that I like so much. Shall I go ahead and read? Not hearing any interruptions, I'll read to you. I said one of the exciting parts of writing my book was reading about Lucretia Mott and Sarah Grimke and Angelina Grimke and I'm thinking of blanking on them, Grace and Sarah Douglas, the African-American woman and daughter who were forced to sit on a separate bench, I think, under the sloping staircase up to the balcony. By the way, women at our street sat on the left-hand side and men on the right-hand side, and same on the facing benches. In England, it seems to be the reverse, based on a picture I've seen of what was called, I think, Grace Street meeting in London. Anyway, these feminists, to think that at one point there was a quarterly meeting and Lucretia Mott and Sarah Grimke were there in the same small meeting in this case. I think an executive committee talking was interesting. So I talked mostly about two generations. One is made up of Sarah Grimke and Lucretia Mott, who were born in the 18th century, and Angelina Grimke, who was born, she was like 17 or 18 years younger than Sarah, and Sarah Douglas, who were really a new generation. And now I mentioned a third generation. And you may have heard this story. As I say, don't stop me because I want to read it. Anna Elizabeth Dickinson, I put it as a coda in my book. A third generation of Orthodox Philadelphia abolitionist women almost came about in the person of Anna Elizabeth Dickinson, 1842 to 1932. Born into the Northern District, she was too much a rebel to stay Quaker in stand-pat times. Her experience with the Arch Street Meeting House would have been limited. At 14, she tried Methodism, and at age 18, she disrupted a lecture when a man insisted that women, including his own daughters, were fit only to be homekeepers. Quote, a Dickinson biographer reports that she leapt to her feet. Quote, you, sir, you say that what your daughters cannot be, no man's daughters can be, that your daughters are incapable of being doctors, lawyers, priests, businessmen, bank presidents, authors, editors. In one word, sir, as you yourself have summed it up, your daughters are fools. Then, shaking her own finger in his face, as the startled audience listened in wonderment, quote, and in heaven's name, what else is to be expected of the daughter of such a father? So that was Anna Dickinson. Of course, how did they react, the Quakers? They read her out. Anna E. Dickinson, who had a right, this is typical language in the 19th century for somebody who was being disowned, who had a right of membership amongst us, has been treated with for neglecting the attendance of all our religious meetings. And here's the important part, and for delivering public lectures inconsistent with the peaceable principles of our religious society, but without producing the desired effect. We therefore testify that she is no longer a member of the Religious Society of Friends. Wouldn't we like having her today? All right, all. I'd be glad to take any questions if you have some.
I'm wondering, do you have any stories from after your book ended? Your book ends sometime in the 60s. So we've got about 60 years more of history. Have you got any good stories from then?
Well, I actually ended in 2011 with the Historical Commission plaque. Remember we bought the
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So actually I did, so I'd have to look at the back of my book. Well, here's, okay. I can tell you about the Philadelphia monthly meeting, our three friends being very well off. Here's the money was spent. This is what I just turned to, not accidentally, October 21, 1984, $750 to member Kent Larrabee to travel in the ministry to Russia. January 20, 1985, $5,000 approved for care of the homeless. Let me find an interesting one. Mind a Friends Neighborhood Guild, Bethesda Project. January 19, 1986, in reaction to an unexpected $24,000 of income in 6 months on funds from Friends Fiduciary, a doubling of the meeting's contribution to PYN to a few $1,000. Shall I go on?
What happened to the parking lot? I mean, the parking lot is, why is that there? And what's
By the way, that was part of the burial ground. So there are lots of bodies under it. And one thing I couldn't find, you know how Southwest Burial Ground, excuse me. There's, in the barn or shed, there's a place to keep bodies in cold storage in the winter, so to speak.
Yeah.
They had to be doing that at our street. I couldn't find where it was, but there was some structure where the gate is now.
Okay. Yeah.
Tom, I'm going to talk. You know, I have any idea if that was where bodies were stored in the winter? I mean, this winter.
When the ground was
until the ground loosened up.
Yeah.
Yes. So what's the question?
Yeah, there was, as with Southwest Burial Ground, there had to be at our street some sort of structure, underground burial vault to keep the body. You don't know, okay.
Yeah, I would think so too, but I know of no relic, nothing left that would show a vault, a storage vault.
All right. Well, there was some structure by where the gate is now, so maybe there. Any other questions?
Yes, Greg, I was wondering why you called your book a biography, because that seems unusual for a building, and I'm wondering if it's a literary tradition that does come up occasionally.
Well, that's true. My feeling was really literature instead of history, but it was because I wanted to talk about the people and so on, and relate the building to Quakerism generally. That's a good question. I don't have a good answer.
You did say.
Yoko has a question. What?
No, you did refer to a family imaginative in a certain period, and you devoted that story.
A family what?
In the story there. Okay, that's fine.
All right. Not a question.
Greg?
Hi, Jane.
Hi. I think you should mention your efforts along with some of the other members of the meeting, including the Uncupers, to have our meeting become a national landmark. And for many good reasons, such as its importance, contributions to the general sort of good democratic processes of our country. I mean, you know, we contributed a lot to the birth of America. And also, this is a wonderful building. And you didn't even mention it.
That is true. Okay.
It is true. And you worked very hard on that, and we learned a lot about the meeting during that process.
Lois thought I stopped at about 65. No, here we go. One more celebration. Is this it? I think so. As the old millennium receded, the Arch Street Property and Youth Services Working Group expressed its gratifying and yet daunting responsibilities in addressing the new millennium. No, I think I better skip forward. All right, Carol Spawn, and you all remember, reporter on the meeting's planned 200th birthday celebration of the Arch Street Meeting House on October 24th, 2004, combined with an already scheduled quarterly meeting. And that was a celebration. Let me get there, sorry.
It's okay. Your journey is interesting.
It is in here.
I know the building is a heritage building because anytime anyone suggests doing anything like putting on solar panels or having rain barrels, we're told that you have to be really careful what you can do because you're not allowed to do things.
Right, yeah.
It's a heritage building.
It's a national landmark. And we had a wonderful time going down to get it to become a national landmark. And the people making the decision said, well, isn't it already? They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe we were petitioning for something that they already thought had happened. But they.
And that was in 2004, did you say? When did it become?
No, it was later than that. It was like 2011 or 2010 or something.
I see.
It's very recent. It was,
I see.
I went to Washington with Tom and Art Larrabee and others to meet with the historical, what was it called? Historical Commission?
Yeah. The National Historic Commission or something. Yeah. And we were there. I say we, I mean Tom and I were there. And
Okay.
Catherine Lavoie.
And what was her name who ran the meeting house? The guides program?
There was Helen. Yeah.
Nancy?
Was Nancy Gibbs involved with that? Nancy Gibbs, yeah. We had a great celebration dinner after that in the meeting house.
Oh, yes.
It became a landmark.
So what does that mean then, now that it has the landmark status?
We're in the same status. We are in the same, there are about 1,300, maybe, oh no, 1,300, more than that, but we're in the same, we're the same level of importance as Independence Hall, Carpenter's Hall, and I'm trying to think of what? Christchurch. And I'm trying to think of landmarks in other countries, other cities and places. But we are among the monuments of the nation that are important. And there are about probably 4,000 of them in the whole. There's a whole, you can go online and see what there may be 2,500 landmarks in the United States.
Now, does federal money come along with that designation?
No.
No,
but a lot of protection and a lot of.
Oh, so I see. So it tells you what you can't do, but they're not going to help you.
Oh.
I think that if you were looking for help and you said you were a landmark, it would be very quick to come.
Okay, yeah.
I think it does help you, but I don't think it's the government. I think it's somebody who cares. Some private individual or company that cares about the landmark.
Thank you for doing that.
Well, it is on the last page.
That's
Would you like me to read the landmark designation?
Yes.
Our Street Friends Meeting House has been designated a National Historic Landmark. This site possesses national significance in commemorating the history of the United States of America. The 1804 plain style meeting house is the work of master builder Owen Bill. The design is an elegant expression of Quaker simplicity, acting on their beliefs. Acting on their beliefs, Philadelphia Quakers worked for social justice and religious freedom, helping to lay the foundation for American democracy. Period.
That used to be framed and hanging somehow over our desk in the vestibule.
Yeah. There was supposed to be on the wall, but anyway, where is it now? It's kept away for safekeeping.
I don't know where it is.
Where is it?
Anyway, it was 2011,
Yeah.
and it was a great event.
Wow, that's great. You know, I really like the grounds. Like a couple of times I've gone around with my video camera and taken video of the trees. I did that in February before the leaves were out, and I've done it more recently as well. I mean, there are just so many gorgeous trees around. There's more than 40 trees in the
Could you be? I can't quite hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I've there's more than 40 trees in the grounds, and I've enjoyed going around and videoing them.
Is the scene of the pin tree still there? There was
Which one's that?
a cutting from a pin planting that was.
That sounds familiar. I believe so. Yes, it is still there.
Okay.
It's on the west side and it's split, and there's problems with it. Yes, Sandra Williams was talking about that. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but there are some beautiful trees there.
Yeah.
And they're huge. Yeah. Mm.
All right. It's been fun. Lois, Susanna, thanks for inviting me.